He called the police to report a body. He didn't mention that he was the one who left it there.
45 years, the Newport Beach Police Department never gave up. The detectives dogged this case.
3 men went to prison for a murder. None of them did it.
To me, if I know I murdered and raped this girl in this fashion, sent 3 people to be convicted, and the prison, 2 of them in prison for a lengthy amount of time, 1 died in prison.
One killer confessed on camera with tears in his eyes, decades after he'd earned the right to shed a single one.
How did you kill her? I just choked her.
5 cold cases, 5 names that took a lifetime to surface. So which of these 5 men actually answered for it? That's a harder question than it sounds. This is Darkest Crimes. 3 men went to prison for this murder. One died behind bars, still serving his sentence, insisting to the end he hadn't done it. The other 2 spent a combined 9 years fighting a case built on evidence that had already excluded them before they were even convicted. In 2024, DNA finally proved they'd been telling the truth all along. The man it pointed to had been living less than 2 miles from the crime scene for 33 years. Then, 4 days after police finally sat down to question him, he was dead. This is the case of Dana Ireland.
Multiple tests in recent months zeroed in on a Hawaiian Paradise Park man. But that man killed himself last week after he was ordered to do a cheek swab.
We're asking the judge to legally find them actually innocent, which they are.
It's been ridiculous, you know. The island or the world has changed so much that I'm starting from like a 2-year-old.
Dana Ireland was 23, visiting Hawaii's Big Island from Virginia. On Christmas Eve, she was riding her bicycle along a remote fishing trail in Kapoho when a vehicle struck her. She was dragged into the brush, raped, beaten. She was found the next morning, barely alive. She died that day, Christmas, at Hilo Medical Center. It became one of Hawaii's most infamous unsolved murders. The investigation stalled for 3 years. In 1994, a man named Frank Pauline Jr., already in prison for an unrelated assault, began telling police a story. It implicated himself and 2 brothers, Albert Ian Schweitzer and Sean Schweitzer. The Schweitzer and Pauline families had a long-standing grudge as neighbors. Detectives found the story inconsistent. They pursued it anyway. In 1998, DNA testing on the rape kit, a hospital gurney sheet, and a bloody T-shirt found near the scene excluded all 3 men completely.
So therefore, the conviction of Albert Ian Schweitz for murder in the 2nd degree, kidnapping, and sexual assault in the 1st degree is hereby vacated, and Mr. Schweitzer shall be released immediately from custody in this court.
We're not the ones. We didn't do this, and it's, you know, the evidence is there. It's something I did not want to do, but I also did not want to be away from my children.
Charges against the Schweitzers were dismissed. Then, in 1999, a jailhouse informant claimed Ian Schweitzer had confessed to him. Charges were refiled. Pauline was convicted in August 1999. Ian Schweitzer was convicted in February 2000, sentenced to roughly 130 years. Despite DNA that had already excluded him. His brother Sean took a plea deal for manslaughter and served about a year. Frank Pauline Jr. was killed by a fellow inmate in a New Mexico prison in 2015. He died still serving the sentence, never exonerated. Albert Ian Schweitzer served more than 2 decades before the Hawaii Innocence Project forced a full review of the case on January 24, 2023. His conviction was vacated.
Albert Schweitzer is now free after spending 23 years behind bars for a murder he did not commit.
None of Ian or any of the other defendants could have wore the T-shirt, and that the T-shirt belonged to the same person whose DNA was found in her panties on the hospital gurney bed that her body was lying on when the ambulance got her to the hospital.
His brother Sean's conviction was vacated later that same year. With Schweitzer free, investigators finally turned back to the DNA profile that had excluded him from the start. Investigators had been calling him unknown male number 1 for over 2 decades. Attorneys for the Schweitzers brought in Steve Kramer, a retired FBI prosecutor who'd led the genetic genealogy team that helped identify the Golden State Killer. Working from crime scene DNA, Kramer built out a family tree stretching back centuries and forwarded his findings to the FBI, who confirmed it. It pointed to a 57-year-old man named Albert Lauro Jr., living less than 2 miles from the fishing trail where Dana was found. An avid fisherman, familiar with the exact trail. In June 2024, investigators quietly collected a fork he'd discarded. The DNA matched to the semen on Dana's body and to the blood on that t-shirt. The same t-shirt that had excluded 3 innocent men 26 years earlier. On July 19, 2024, Lauro agreed to a voluntary interview at the Hilo police station. He wasn't under arrest. He was free to leave. According to police, in that interview, Lauro admitted to sexually assaulting Dana Ireland, but he denied killing her. His account, as relayed by investigators, he said he came upon her already struck by a vehicle, already injured, lying on the ground. He said he assaulted her, then left. Police collected a court-ordered cheek swab to confirm the match beyond doubt. Chief Ben Moskowitz later explained why. The DNA alone, in the department's judgment, wasn't enough to establish probable cause for a murder charge, and the statute of limitations on the rape charge had expired years earlier.
Dana Ireland was killed on Hawaii Island 33 years ago, and after decades of searching for her murderer, DNA has led to a new suspect.
So we face a very real possibility that if we had arrested Mr. Lauro without probable cause, that anything we gathered as a result of that process could be extended, which is absolutely not what we want. Who either knew him recently or around the time of the murders that can help guide us to the search for what really happened.
4 days later, on July 23, 2024, Albert Lauro Jr. was found dead. An apparent suicide. The final court-ordered confirmation of his DNA match came back after he was already gone. He was never arrested, never charged, never convicted of anything connected to Dana Ireland's death. And here's what hasn't been resolved. Even now, Albert Ian and Sean Schweitzer's convictions were vacated. But Hawaii County has never declared them innocent. Prosecutors have said publicly that they still believe the brothers could have been involved. In January 2025, the Schweitzers sued Hawaii County, accusing detectives of fabricating evidence against them 30 years ago. Dana Ireland got a name. She never got a trial. And 2 men who lost decades of their lives are still fighting in court, just to be believed.
The evidence is incredibly compelling. There are 7 DNA samples that prove that Ian Schweitzer and his brother, Sean Schweitzer, are innocent. They are all innocent.
I remember early on in the case, I said once, my son is innocent. And I'll say it again. My son is innocent. Both of my sons are innocent.
And looking at Sean's case, he's just as innocent as Ian and as innocent as Frank.
In 2018, on the 45th anniversary of an 11-year-old girl's murder, police released something nobody had seen before in this case. Her face. Not a sketch, not a photograph. A computer-generated portrait built entirely from DNA recovered from her body 45 years earlier, predicting what her killer's face probably looked like before anyone had a name to put beneath it. This is the case of Linda O'Keefe.
Detectives believe they have solved a more than 4 decades old cold case thanks to modern DNA technology.
I never really thought they would actually ever find the individual. I didn't really think that would happen. And so now it's like, okay, this is a man who's had this life for 46 years. You know, he's worked, he's raised a family, he's moved, and in a way I feel bad for his family because they probably had no idea.
And yet for 45 years, the Newport Beach Police Department never gave up. The detectives dogged this case. The community made sure that justice would be secured.
Corona Del Mar, California, a beach community. 11-year-old Linda O'Keefe left summer school without her usual ride. She called her mother, crying, and asked to be picked up. Her mother, busy with work, told her to just walk. It wasn't far. Linda hung up, upset, and started home alone. A witness later remembered seeing her talking to a man near a turquoise van around 1:15 in the afternoon. She never arrived. The community searched for 14 hours. The next morning, a man out searching for frogs in the Back Bay wetlands found her body in a ditch. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Newport Beach detectives chased leads for decades. Nothing held.
This is a murder that occurred in 1973. It was a kidnapping, as I indicated, for both sexual acts and eventually resulted in an 11-year-old girl dying. Famous case in the sense that people in the city of Newport Beach have been following this case for literally 45 years. A DNA sample was recovered from the victim. However, when that DNA sample was put in the CODIS system, there was not a hit. And so that sample remained in the system for a long period of time. And the fact that these detectives were using every means available to them, they received a pointer indication through genealogical DNA.
DNA recovered from Linda's body was entered into CODIS in 2001. No match. The case became one of Orange County's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Whispered about by a generation of Corona Del Mar kids who grew up hearing about the girl taken off the street in daylight. In July 2018, Newport Beach Police tried something no department had tried before. A 24-hour live account narrating Linda's final day in her own voice, built from witness statements and records. At the same time, investigators deployed that DNA phenotyping technology and released the computer-generated face. Weeks later, investigative genetic genealogy did what 4 decades of leads couldn't.
Detectives believe they have solved the cold case from nearly 45 years ago thanks to modern DNA technology.
Our investigators used forensic DNA testing and an online genealogy website to identify the suspect's DNA.
The DNA traced back to a 72-year-old man living quietly in Monument, Colorado. His name was James Allen Neal, but that wasn't his name in 1973. At the time of Linda's murder, he was going by James Albert Layton Jr., having moved to Southern California from Chicago. Not long after the killing, he relocated to Florida and changed his identity. Investigators located him in Colorado through surveillance and old-fashioned police work. He was arrested in February 2019. Then came the detail that made this worse. Digging into Neal's history, investigators uncovered 2 more child victims in Riverside County, children who say he abused them sometime between the 1990s and early 2000s, decades after Linda's death. Neal was charged with Linda's murder, with special circumstance allegations of kidnapping and lewd acts on a child. Extradited to California, Neal pleaded not guilty. He was held awaiting trial, facing up to 82 years to life if convicted. He never got the chance to face a jury. On May 25, 2020, while in custody in Orange County, Neal died of an unspecified illness. He was 73. Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer put it plainly. The death of James Neal prior to putting him on trial for Linda's rape and murder robs the O'Keefe family of the justice they so deserve. Linda's parents never lived to see even this much. Her mother died in 2005, her father in 2008. Neither one learned their daughter's killer had a name. They finally built his face out of DNA. They finally learned his name, and he still never had to answer for what he did to her.
Finding out that there's a face and a name to the individual just brings additional closure, because I had closure when they found her body the next day. And because of my profound faith, I've been able to forgive the individual and even pray for him and his family today.
He called the police to report a body. He didn't mention that he was the one who left it there. Police had this man's name in their file on day 1. He owned the right gun. He lived in the right area. They questioned him. He denied everything. He passed a polygraph. They let him go, and he lived an ordinary life in that same city for the next 46 years. This is the case of Carla Walker.
For more than 4 decades, her murder has haunted Fort Worth. A teenager abducted after a dance. Her body found days later. That case has run cold for years, but her family has not stopped looking for answers.
At that point, they were parked in the parking lot, and it is our understanding that they were attacked while in the car, and that someone opened the door, pulled Carla out, and basically kidnapped her against her will.
Carla Jean Walker was 17. A cheerleader and junior at Western Hills High School. She'd gone to a Valentine's dance with her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy. On the way home, they stopped at a bowling alley parking lot. A stranger yanked open the car door, dragged Carla into the dark. Rodney came to and ran for help, screaming that she'd been taken. 3 days later, her body was found in a drainage culvert off Pearl Ranch Road near Benbrook Lake. She had been tortured, raped, and strangled. Investigators interviewed dozens of people. One of them was a local man named Glenn Samuel McCurley. He owned a .22 caliber pistol, matching the type used in the attack. He told police it had been stolen. He agreed to a polygraph. He passed. At the time, that cleared him completely. Detectives moved on. The case went cold for decades. Rodney McCoy, beaten, left for dead, and still alive. Years later, an anonymous handwritten letter surfaced, naming Carla's killer to a detective. Police publicized it, hoping someone would recognize the handwriting. Nobody ever did. In April 2020, Carla's case was featured on a true crime series, reviving public interest. That September, the last remaining DNA evidence on Carla's clothing was sent to Othram, Inc., a Texas lab specializing in degraded DNA and forensic genetic genealogy. Othram built a family tree from the crime scene DNA. It led directly back to the McCurley family. The same family investigators had already questioned 46 years earlier. Glenn Samuel McCurley was arrested in September 2020. He was 77.
In a Texas cold case, Fort Worth police just arrested a man in connection to a 1974 murder.
Trial of a man accused of kidnapping, raping, and murdering a teenager. The decades-old cold case in Tarrant County made its way to the courtroom once technology caught up with the evidence.
McCurley was indicted on a capital murder charge. His trial began in August 2021. Jurors watched a video of his 2020 interview with detectives. In it, McCurley is heard saying, tearfully, "I took advantage of her, I guess. I choked her to death, I guess. I'm guilty." On the trial's third day, he changed his plea to guilty. Judge Elizabeth Beach sentenced him to life in prison. Carla's brother, Jim Walker, 12 years old when his sister was killed, and the one who'd spent decades keeping the case alive, was in the courtroom.
Or 17,053 days ago, Carla was abducted. The pain, my mom went through. Sorry, guys.
And what you've done now, Mr. McCurley, is taken all the pain and everything we went through and put it on your family now until the day they die. Because they're going to live with this too.
McCurley died in prison of natural causes in July 2023. Less than 2 years into a sentence that was supposed to be his whole life. Detectives have long suspected McCurley may be connected to other unsolved killings from the same era in Fort Worth. He was never charged with any of them. Carla's case pushed real legislative change. U.S. senators introduced the Carla Walker Act, aimed at funding forensic genetic genealogy nationwide. Police had his name in 1974. He confessed on camera 46 years later, and still only served 2 years for it. Drivers saw it happen. A young woman bursting out of the woods, waving her arms, begging someone, anyone, to stop. Nobody did. A man stepped out behind her, calm and unhurried, and walked her back into the dark like nothing was wrong. By morning, she was dead on a slope beside a parking lot. For the next 44 years, her killer lived 2 miles away. Married, raised 2 kids, never once looked over his shoulder, until the day he spit out a piece of gum he never thought twice about. This is the case of Barbara Mae Tucker.
Every night I would tell my husband, before going to sleep at night, I'd think about Barbara. I'm just so thankful that I saw 2020 that night, because it was talking about all that.
Decades later, an accused killer has been caught in the oldest known murder out of Gresham.
Barbara Mae Tucker was 19, a business student at Mount Hood Community College in Gresham, Oregon. That evening, witnesses driving past campus saw her run from a wooded slope onto the road, waving frantically. A man emerged from the same trees and walked her back toward the woods. It looked resolved. The next morning, a student found her body on that same slope. She'd been sexually assaulted and beaten to death. In 2000, investigators developed a full DNA profile from her autopsy. There was nobody to match it to. The profile sat for 2 decades. In 2015, Detective Aaron Turnage was assigned the case and refused to let it die.
What kept me going in this case, I promised her 3 years ago that I was going to solve her case. I don't have a choice. That's the job that I have. My job is to solve her case. And if that means working around the clock, sacrifices, that's what happens. That's what kept me going. Something I've never experienced in my career.
That's really great.
It's pretty awesome.
In 2021, he submitted the DNA profile to Parabon Nanolabs for forensic genetic genealogy, building family trees from crime scene DNA, the way people trace ancestry online. It worked. The genealogy pointed to one family in Troutdale, Oregon. Robert Plimpton, now a 58-year-old husband and father of 2. Robert Plimpton was still a teenager the night Barbara Tucker was murdered. A minor killed her, then simply grew up, built a career, got married, raised children, and lived out 4 decades of ordinary life just miles from where it happened. Genealogy alone couldn't arrest him. Police needed a direct DNA match. So detectives surveilled him, waiting for him to discard something voluntarily. He did. A piece of chewing gum spit onto the ground. It matched the DNA from Tucker's autopsy exactly. Plimpton was arrested June 8, 2021, charged as an adult despite being a minor at the time of the crime. In March 2024, after a 3-week bench trial, Judge Amy Baggio found him guilty of first-degree murder and 4 counts of second-degree murder. In October 2024, he was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 40 years before he's eligible for parole. Barbara's parents never got to see this day. Her father died in 1989, her mother in 1995. Both gone before their daughter's killer ever had a name. This is the one case in this compilation with a clean ending, a trial, a verdict, a sentence that will actually be served. It only took 44 years to get there. A man called a sheriff's station in Southern California to report finding a body. He sounded evasive, argumentative even, when deputies pressed for details. He wouldn't say if the body was male or female. He was questioned, took a polygraph, passed. As far as he was concerned, the case was closed. What nobody knew for another 45 years was that the man who reported the body and the man who left it there. This is the case of Esther Gonzalez.
45 years after the rape and murder of a 17-year-old Beaumont girl, investigators have finally confirmed the suspect's identity.
Sometimes I wish that I would have followed her, If I would have known that was going to happen, I would have followed her.
So she'd been over to her parents' house, and she decided she was gonna walk from her parents' house that evening. Saturday afternoon, the Banning Sheriff's Office got a phone call from a person claiming to have found a body.
Esther Gonzalez was 17, walking from her parents' house in Beaumont, California, to her sister's house in nearby Banning. She never arrived. The next day, her body was found off Highway 243, dumped in a snowbank. She had been raped and bludgeoned to death. Within 5 days, investigators identified the caller, Lewis Randolph, Randy Williamson, a young local man. He agreed to a polygraph. He passed. At the time, that cleared him completely. Detectives moved on. None of the other leads panned out. The case went cold for over 4 decades.
She was attacked and murdered while walking from her parents' house in Beaumont to her sister's home in Banning.
Her body was found the next day, but her killer remained unknown for decades.
For more than 40 years, it's hard not to lose hope. That's how Esther Gonzalez's family felt for so long as they waited for investigators to pin down her killer and bring him to justice.
A semen sample recovered from Esther's body was preserved, eventually entered into CODIS. No match for years, Williamson lived out an ordinary life. He died in Florida in 2014, 35 years after the murder, having never faced a single question about it again. In 2023, Riverside County's Regional Cold Case Homicide Team sent the evidence to Othram, the same lab that helped crack Carla Walker's case, hoping for a fresh lead. Then came the detail that changed everything. Because Williamson had died in Florida, his 2014 autopsy in Broward County had included a routine blood draw a decade later. That sample was pooled and sent to the California Department of Justice for direct comparison against the 1979 crime scene DNA. It was a match. The argumentative caller who'd reported finding Esther's body in the snow 45 years earlier hadn't stumbled onto a stranger's crime scene. He'd created it, then picked up the phone and reported it himself, correctly betting that a polygraph, a test with no real scientific reliability, would clear him for good. It worked. For 45 years. Riverside County confirmed the DNA match in November 2024. Esther's siblings, who had waited nearly half a century for an answer, learned that their sister's killer had lived out the rest of his natural life without a single consequence, and had already been dead for a decade by the time his name was finally cleared of doubt. He was never arrested, never charged, never once made to answer for it, because by the time anyone learned his name, there was no one left to arrest.
I feel closure. I mean, I know he died, but, you know, he's got to face God, so that's what I'd be afraid of. She got upset with my dad. I don't know what he's told her, but she got upset. Took off walking. Tell myself, why didn't we follow her? You know, because she just wanted to ride to her boyfriend.
5 names. 5 families who finally got an answer after decades of nothing. Every single one of these cases was solved the same way. DNA that had been sitting in evidence storage since before some of you were born, finally given the technology to speak. But naming him and punishing him turned out to be 2 different things. Robert Plimpton stood trial, was convicted, was sentenced. That's 1. Glenn McCurley confessed on camera, pleaded guilty, went to prison, and died less than 2 years later. That's 2 with an asterisk. Albert Lauro Jr. was identified, interviewed, let go, dead 4 days later, never charged. Randy Williamson was already 10 years in the ground by the time anyone learned his name. James Neal was arrested, charged, held for trial, and died in a cell before a single juror was ever seated. 5 men, 5 names finally spoken out loud, 2 verdicts, 0 executions of a full sentence, and 3 men who paid for a crime they didn't commit, who are still, right now, fighting in court just to be believed. DNA answered the question these families spent lifetimes asking. It rarely answered it in time to matter. Subscribe to Darkest Crimes. Drop a comment. Which of these 5 cases do you think about longest after the video ends? We read every one. New case files every week.